Hello and good day, everybody. This is Blue Knight 7 with the Blue Knight Cast. Today is episode 9, where I talk about Nintendo's special relationship with Square Enix and what it may bring. Basically, I kind of facepalmed myself after I did that April 2nd Nintendo Switch 2 Direct Predictions episode, and realized I didn't talk a bit about Square Enix, and it's hard to talk about a Nintendo Direct these days without mentioning what Square Enix might do. And so I'm going to try to give it its own episode, because honestly, it could. When I started thinking of the possibilities, it's kind of a deeper side trip than I took with the other companies like Capcom and Namco. So I want to talk a little bit about Square's history with Nintendo for those who don't fully know, and just what I predict could come out in the near future for Switch 2 and Switch 1. Not so much tying myself to the Direct as just saying what I think they will bring in the next 2 to 3 years. That said, if you like what you've been hearing from me so far for content, please like, subscribe, click the notification bell. I'm trying to put these episodes out regular, and I do have a goal to try to reach 1,000 subscribers and generally qualify for monetization. I'd like to see this grow into something. And if I can just get subscribership to grow, I will acknowledge what's going on and try to invest a little more into the production value of this. This is something I try to do when I have a minute, just to get the content out, and I'm just trying to focus on getting it out regular right now. But that being said, thank you for your time listening, and let's get into it. Square, formerly Squaresoft, now Square Enix, has been a part of Nintendo's game libraries ever since the beginning, or with the NES. And Final Fantasy has kind of been an important one for Nintendo in the early days. Not all the games came over to the West, of course, but Final Fantasy 1 for the NES. Final Fantasy 4 came to Super NES as Final Fantasy 2. Yeah, I know, it's confusing. And then they skipped 5, but Final Fantasy 6 came over here as Final Fantasy 3. And other games came for those systems as well. A steady stream of JRPGs. Some of the best. Some are the best. I mean, most would say Chrono Trigger is one of the greatest games of all time, period. And it is an amazing JRPG, and I enjoyed the time I spent with that game. But I would also point out the Mana series. Secret of Mana is what got me into JRPGs. But beyond the series, they just have several games that are just well remembered. I don't think any of them are truly bad. But Super Mario RPG, one of my favorite RPGs of all time as well. Love the Switch 1 remake, by the way. It's great. Live Alive, a game we recently saw on Switch 1 as a remake to the West for the first time. Chrono Trigger again. You can't talk about Square without mentioning Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, or Mana, or Dragon Quest at this point, where they acquired Enix. But Dragon Quest 3 Remake recently released for Switch 1. Amazing, stunning game to look at. The other HD 2D games you've seen on Switch 1. Octopath Traveler 2, Triangle Strategy, Live Alive, mentioning that again. And now the Dragon Quest remakes. truly amazing stuff. But as some may know, there was a big break in Square's relationship and Nintendo at the start of the N64 generation. Probably a little before that, truthfully, but the biggest thing to know about that is they had a big rift where Nintendo kept using cartridges. Square wanted to take advantage of CD-ROM media like PlayStation was doing. And that's a whole big thing. Nintendo and Sony, before they announced separate consoles, they were working on a version of the Super NES that had a CD drive. It was just a big deal back then. But instead of getting into that, I'm just going to say there was a big rift. Final Fantasy VII went to the PlayStation instead of Nintendo 64. Even though it was actually a Nintendo 64 game in its early stages. It was just a big divide, and Square stayed away from Nintendo for years. The next generation with GameCube, Game Boy Advance, new leadership at Nintendo. I don't know exactly what they did, but somehow they were able to normalize relations again. So they got a spin-off Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles for GameCube and started to see a string of smaller releases, often re-releases of older Final Fantasy games or Dragon Quest games on Game Boy Advance going through DS, with other smaller projects too. A re-release of Chrono Trigger 4DS, I remember distinctly. Square started supporting Nintendo again, but their mainline Final Fantasies, anything they had that you might say was big, generally stayed anchored to PlayStation. For PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, going on to PlayStation 3. And even with PS4, a lot of it, you started to see them branch off a little bit, more willing to say, put Final Fantasy 15 on Xbox, things like that. But there would always be like some timed exclusivity with PlayStation. Though recently their new leadership has said they're pursuing multi-platform approaches from here on. Now, that's good news for Nintendo. Though I will say relations with Square was already pretty good going through Switch 1. Probably one of the biggest mind-blowing moments for me during the Switch's time was a Nintendo Direct where they announced all these older PlayStation 2 era Final Fantasy games that Nintendo's fans missed out on were coming to Switch. FF7, 8, 9, 10, 10-2, 12. That was mind-blowing. And to me, that was the moment where I said to myself, yeah, they got it fixed now. Nintendo's got it fixed with Square. They actually want to sell games now for Nintendo platforms. Nintendo fixed it. And to me, things have been going pretty good for Nintendo ever since. I'm not saying Square made the generation, but when you look at the top third-party games for Switch, Square made a lot of the better quality ones. They weren't the only one, but they did contribute to the Switch's library in a way that I think Namco wishes it did, looking back. Maybe Capcom as well. With that being said, where do we go with Switch 2? Well, I'm going to start with Switch 1 and make a prediction. We already know Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remakes are in development. I think they're going to stay as Switch 1 games. That way you have the whole trilogy on Switch 1. You got back compatibility for Switch 2. I just see those as sort of the last hurrah for Switch 1. So we'll get that out of the gate. Near term for Switch 2, I'm going to go with Nate the Hate's leaks. Because generally speaking, I believe Nate the Hate. If something turns out different than what he said, it's probably just coming later. That's what I've figured out with Nate the Hate. But if you go by him, yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, the first two chapters of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, are coming to Switch 2. So I'm just going to say, yeah, those are coming. Maybe not at launch, but those are in the pipe. I'd say those will be the first two things you really see on Switch 2. Just for Switch 2. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll go beyond what Nate the Hate has said and say the third game, yeah, Switch 2 comes out when it comes out. I'm going to guess it comes out the same time as other platforms. Could be wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong, but I think that's what's going to happen. As far as other games, though, I think there's some possibilities. The only other thing out there that we know should be coming, and it's not a big exciting one, is Forever Entertainment. The same people who brought you Front Mission First and Front Mission 2 remakes have also said they're working on Front Mission 3. It was announced for Switch 1, so yeah, that would probably be another Switch 1 game. And that would have been a game released on PlayStation 1. So, yeah, I'm going to say that's coming. Still coming. We don't know when. It's not something Forever has talked about. They're probably still recovering from all of the critical reception of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. We've already talked about that before. But I would say that's still in the pipe and still coming. But what else beyond that? We also have leaks going from the NVIDIA leak from a few years ago that there has been a Final Fantasy IX remake in development. Probably not the same scope or scale as what they're doing with Final Fantasy VII. Thank God. And some sort of remake or something for Final Fantasy Tactics, strategy spin-off game. Very well remembered amongst Final Fantasy fans. I don't know if these are Switch 1 or 2. I want to say Switch 1 because these have been heard about and kind of known about for a while or talked about for a while, but who knows? I'll split the difference. I'm going to say Final Fantasy Tactics I'm going to say these are both smaller scale, but Final Fantasy Tactics will be a Switch 1. Final Fantasy IX Remake will be a Switch 2 whenever they're announced. I guess you can tell. I think Square is going to throw stuff at both platforms because you can't ignore the Switch 1 install base. And I think Square, out of all the third parties, is in a unique position to have higher budget, lower budget, higher tier, lower tier productions games that they can throw at both platforms for a while. I think that's what will happen. When they finally leave Switch 1, what would I expect to see after all of that? I'm going to say, instead of the cloud versions of those Kingdom Hearts games that we got on Switch 1, they are going to finally give us native ports uh, of the Kingdom Hearts series leading up to Kingdom Hearts 4. I believe that's what will happen. I'm not saying Kingdom Hearts 4 will be a Switch 2 game because of all things, the way they like to push the tech with that, I just don't know. But I do think there could be Kingdom Hearts actual real ports to Switch 2. And probably a Kingdom Hearts 4 port that will run on Switch 2. That would be my predictions. Now, are we open to surprises beyond that? Yeah, Square's big enough to do that. I think they're trying to focus on sure bets and heavy hitters right now. Everything I just dropped ought to be a sure bet or a heavy hitter. But could they surprise something else? Well, I mean, there was recent news saying they was going to try to do something with Chrono Trigger in celebration of its anniversary. And of all games, you would think Square would have ported to Switch by now. They did not do a thing with Chrono Trigger. Chrono Cross, the sequel that's not remembered as well, yes they did. They even brought back Radical Dreamers, an obscure Saddle of You visual novel-like thing that came out for, well, the Satellaview system. And when this strange add-on that Super NES had in Japan that we never got in the US. And, you know, you would think HD 2D remake of Chrono Trigger would be a no-brainer. That could be something that happens too as a surprise, but nothing to be sure about. They said they were going to they have some projects for Chrono Trigger in the works, some that go beyond the game's universe, whatever that means. Probably Fortnite skins. But they will probably do something with Chrono Trigger before it's over, is my point. There is a good port they did recently for PC. If they just brought it, people would buy it. No doubt in my mind. And I do think even after Dragon Quest 1 and 2 remake, there's probably another HD 2D project in the works. If it is Chrono Trigger, great, that's the answer. But if it isn't, there's going to be something else. I don't think they're completely done with that method of making those games just yet. So, with that, I'll just say thank you for your time listening to this. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll probably stick our nose into some other companies between now and the Direct and discuss what else could be going on in the near future, and probably revisiting a lot of this after the Direct, just to see how close I was and just maybe revise the forecasts accordingly. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for your time today. Have a good day.